I will not go into the differences between the concepts posthumanism, transhumanism, but I will point out why is it important that we consider ourselves human and not post-human. So, posthuman as a concept used to free oneself from the spoils of being a mortal, boring, and not that intelligent human being. I think the biggest problem of posthumanity is that it disrupts the idea of humanity, and more importantly, the idea of human rights or who is deemed important enough to be a human. I believe the universality of human rights is questionable, but speaking more or less about the West, I believe posthumanity moves the focus away from the right to be human to the right to be free from being a responsible human. The idea of posthuman pushes us away from the social and from the human responsibility. It would be said it's a means of freeing ourselves from identity politics, as the posthuman does not have to be defined by gender, race, or ethnicity. But it still defines us. A posthuman subject must be a consumer, otherwise it cannot be more than human. I will not go into the differences between consumers or responsible consumers, but let's just stay with the distinction that in order to be a post-human, we need to have the means to be that, and we need to buy certain technological appliances to be post-human. In this regard, I think it's important to point out that humans are the ones that are enslaved and work for the gadgets and the tools that make us post-human. There still are physical beings, alive beings, to work for the elements that enable us to have those gadgets. So, any reflection, of course, of what post-human is implies what a human is. And I would say it's important to have this idea that posthumans are the ones that are able to be posthumans. The ones that are questioning posthumanity are the privileged ones. And in the Western world, to question this distinction is to have a very privileged position. So, if we think about who is the protagonist of this story of humans and posthumans, let's turn to people who talk about singularity and talk about superintelligence. Those people are the ones that are afraid of losing their own dominant position in the world, the position that enables them to talk about intelligence that works for their own right. And I would say, yeah, it's predominantly wealthy, white males from the West. It would be against my principles to say that in the future it will remain like this and that it will be still white males from the West that will have the means to be post-human. I believe in change, and I believe that people will recognize their spoils, this time digital spoils, and find new ways of living, perhaps not digital ways of living. I do not think that any military technology, such as technologies that enable post-humanity usually are, can make us free. And of course, there are biohackers, there are makers, there are people that want to enable better thinking for themselves, but I think we should talk and we should point out the faults of our systems. And I was recently thinking about the future of human sexuality. I began thinking about robots, about sex robots, and how we are afraid of human connection that is physical, that is, let's say, dirty, that is not pure, and that does not always reply to our questions in the way we want them to. And I encountered the Italian philosopher called Mario Perniola, and his work, The Sex Appeal of the Inorganic. I think it's a really interesting work, as it just shows how far can we go in our thinking that bodies are not necessary anymore. His argument is quite complicated, but basically he has this concept of the thing that feels. We're not subjects anymore, we're not humans anymore, we're things that actually feel. He has this idea that this is a revolutionary force in society, moving away from orgasm, moving away from bodies. Well, I'm somehow concerned with this transhumanist idea of what is the thing that makes us less enslaved. I understand that ideas can bring us forward, but on the other hand, it's important to think in who wants us to be stable, who wants us to forget about our own bodies and think of ourselves as things. And the systemic critique here is, I think, necessary. If we think about humans as things that feel, that are not necessarily embodied, we lose a lot. We lose human connection, and I don't think there is such a necessity to get rid of our humanity. Of course, humanity is problematic. We have other alive beings, such as animals, who do not have rights. Nature is something that is separate from us, and I think we should not be separate from our nature. If you ask indigenous people, in Europe we have Sami people who are the only left indigenous people. They do not separate themselves from nature. And now the Western world wants to separate themselves from bodies, from humanity. And I think this is very problematic. It goes in favor of capital. It does not go in favor of, let's say, good. And I use this word good for a certain purpose. It doesn't do any good for humanity. And to go back to human rights in socialism. I come from a country that used to live socialism, and human rights were tied to the idea of being a worker. Workers get human rights, and of course it's quite the same in the West. Basically, it's citizenship that gives you human rights. But I think it's quite perverse that we now, in the European Commission at least, they want to give rights to robots. We're getting back to the idea of things that feel, things that have personality. Well, okay, it's true that humans are imaginative beings that just give personality to things and to, well, whatever. But humans also have human rights. Humans still live under jurisdictions of national states that give them rights to flourish. And the problem is that we, many times, well, in most societies, our human rights are tied to work. And automation is quite problematic in this regard, because we might not get the rights we want if our labor is transformed to robots. So I think the question when we talk about AI and ethics and robots is, what do we want from this? Why do we need robotics? Why do we need artificial intelligence? Are we not clever enough? And I think there's this, again, I will use the word perversity, in thinking that we need to be more intelligent, we need to be more innovative. But I think we should be more compassionate. It's not enough to have new things, to have new commodities. I think we have bigger problems. The problems we have is that there are people who should have human rights and they're not having them. They do not have their own environments anymore because of the human thirst for commodities, for the elements we need for our gadgets to survive. If we think of Syria, there is a big conflict there, and I could say the point of this conflict is that we need fuel for our gadgets. We need fuel for our things to work, for our way of life. I would like to point out that we should focus our attention more on the ones that should have rights but don't have the right to live a proper life, and not focus on how robots should have rights. I think this is really just, well, problematic. Well, if we think about the future of work, I was really shocked. Well, not maybe shocked, but I really did not like what I saw in one of the episodes of Black Mirror, when people had to be players in a game in order to get enough credit to survive, and well, it was a luxury not to be bombarded by information. Well, I could say that I think the trend is that we are going to be consumers, and being a consumer will give us the right to be a citizen and so on. It's hard to speculate. It's hard to speculate how fast automation will change our societies. It's hard to speculate whether it will change them for the good or for the bad. But I think the idea of work is changing. Also, machines are not tools anymore. Machines are becoming workers. And of course, accordingly, also idea of what humans are also changes. It just seems to me, I'm just like now in this process of thinking about my further education, what I'm going to work when I'm going to be older. And it just seems that most jobs now go into optimization, on people working on automating their own jobs, to professions contributing to robotics or being simply obsolete. And there are a lot of jobs that produce simulations. And it's hard to say what kind of jobs are productive enough. It just seems that, well, being a critical thinker is not a very productive occupation. I can say this from my own experience. But if we think about how medicine works, how consultancy works, how trading works, we're increasingly putting a lot of decisions in the arms, in the hands of computers. And we are just, it seems that we want to give our jobs away, but giving our jobs away also means giving our rights away. And having virtual assistants, when there are a lot of people that want to assist other people, it's just somehow weird. Well, there are a lot of problems connected to automation. For example, I think Internet of Things is the idea that we're going to have all of our needs connected to internet, to the system that's going to help us, that we don't have to work more. But on the other hand, the reliancy that this produces is really, really, really dangerous. And I'm not sure I want my fridge to know everything about when I'm nervous, when I want to eat something. Okay, not to exaggerate, but I think the Internet of Things is a really big problem. And another example of technology overtaking people is how IBM, which actually is connected to Nazi Germany, how it helps to sort what refugees, which migrants are deemed more problematic than others. What is your terrorist score is a talk that I recently heard. It's by Kate Crawford, and it's really interesting to see what kind of measurements actually, well, we don't know what kind of measurements make us more or less terrorist, but the idea that there's technology deciding who is deemed or who should have human rights, I think we went too far, and we should go back to basic questions. Not the questions how technology is going to help us flourish and prosper, because this very technology is making some people a big part of our society, just impossible to survive. The second thing, political propaganda. If we just look, some people are saying that the reason for Brexit and the reason for Trump are Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Go read about it. I think it's a very important question of why do we have big data? Who has the ability to use big data? What is big data doing to us? And every information we live, every trace we live on the internet, what is the focus? What is the issue connected to it? So it just seems that because of technology, because of digital technology, the political sphere is kind of losing its steam, and the social is disappearing. We live in a world of simulations, and we just want more and more simulations. We want robots that have human rights. We want humans that behave more like robots and are very rational. Well, I think it's the most problematic issue to finish this is that giving rights to robots when there are people who are being pushed away from their homes because of the West wants the commodities, because the West wants new humans. Well, I think this is really a perverse effect of the consumerist West. And I would like to be less techno-pessimist at the moment, but I think we just went too far, and we should go back not to making robots that produce filaments, but back to crafts, back to makers that are able to do stuff without technology.